The Week in Bible Prophecy, a Prophecy Watchers podcast.
Welcome to the podcast this week, everyone. I am here with Josh Peck. Welcome, Josh.
Hey, thanks. Glad to be back.
And we are going to be talking about, again, one of my favorite topics, and that is the Dead Sea Scrolls. And before we do, I want to remind everybody, first and foremost, if you are watching this on YouTube, then we encourage people to subscribe. Many people listen, and we're trying to grow this channel because through subscriptions as well, because we know that most likely the time is coming when our main channel will be removed, and so we'll already have a foothold here in this one. And also just remind everybody as well that we are going to be in Branson, Missouri, Christmas in Branson, coming December 5th through the 8th. Ask you to join us there if you'd like. It's going to be a great time. We got over 20 speakers going to be coming and speaking and giving us a couple presentations. We got, I think over 45 presentations there. It's a great time to be there. If you can't join us in person, you certainly can join us through live stream. That information is going to be coming soon. But check it out, prophecywatchers.com, and you can scroll down and see the banner for Branson. It should be a great time. I mean, you're going to be there. And
yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
It's going to be good. And so we get a chance to talk about your new 2-volume set, Forgotten Prophecies of the Dead Sea Scrolls, Unlocking the Final Jubilee of the Church Age. And so this is a brand new production. Mm-hmm. It has, let's talk just for people's background here. This is kind of an updated and expanded version of a previous book that you did. So kind of talk about the differences there. I think that'll be good.
Yeah, when I first started studying this was about 5 years ago. And I got so excited when I first started looking into the Dead Sea Scrolls because they're amazing, they're phenomenal. And after a few months of research, I wrote my first book on it, which was called Lost Prophecies of Qumran. And then I kind of thought that was going to be it, but just more stuff kept coming up. There was more to learn about the Dead Sea Scrolls, and now it's 5 years later. Well, after a couple of years of additional study, I thought, man, I really wish I would have waited to write Lost Prophecies of Qumran because there's so much more information that can be added here. So recently, I thought, well, why don't I just do an updated and expanded version of that older book and just have the same book, but just add in all the extra stuff that I want to add in. So that's what I did. So this really is a project that has been 5 years in the making. Now I kind of look at Lost Prophecies of Qumran almost like the rough draft or like the crib notes before you really get into the meat of it, because what the kinds of things that I came across years after that just blew my mind more than what I found in those first few months. And the reason that it's 2 volumes is because there's so much information, it can't really be put into 1 volume. I did actually try that, though. When I first put the book together, it was almost 800 pages, and I had a proof copy sent to me. And when I got this thing, it was like it was something that, like, it's so daunting to look at. Like, who's gonna read this? I mean, especially I know a lot of people like reading when they travel. That would have been a book you can't take on a plane. It's just way too big. So it was just an obvious thing to split it up into 2 volumes, which makes it a lot easier for people to read. So it's a 2-volume set. If people go on prophecywatchers.com to order it, make sure you get both, because one will not make sense without the other one. You got to get both.
Yeah, very good. And you have the subtitle, Volume 1 is Essene History and the Prophetic Calendar, and then Volume 2 is the Lost Festivals and the Prophetic Timeline. Mm-hmm. And before we get into some of the nitty gritty here, I think for the listeners is just to give a background. I remember I took a class on the Dead Sea Scrolls in seminary, and just for people to understand, we have roughly 900 scrolls, 15,000 fragments found, in the area on the western shore of the Dead Sea, really beginning in like 1946, for 10 years to 1956. Of the 900, 250 of the scrolls are biblical. So there's 3 divisions, just for people to understand. There's the biblical scrolls, and then you have the non-biblical scrolls, like the Book of Enoch. It's still a scroll. And then you have that which is called the sectarian manuscripts, like the Damascus document, other things that were documents that were written by the people amongst their rules. Again, Damascus, the rule, the community rule, other things like that. So you also have them being written in Hebrew. You have Aramaic, you have Greek, even some of the other places. You got Latin, Nabatean. It's really kind of fast, even Arabic. So you have a variety of scrolls there, going from the Dead Sea area all the way down to Masada and even a little more south than that. But let's talk about this for a minute, because I know for me, when the Dead Sea Scrolls, they've been known, of course, since the late 40s, but they were not published. They were basically hijacked by scholars. And I remember reading about this in the 90s, really in the mid to late 90s. And Herschel Shanks was the guy that was the editor of Bar Magazine, the Biblical Archaeology Review magazine. And he was upset that these scholars were keeping these scrolls for themselves, and they were unwilling to publish them, and they were keeping them under lock and key. And the long story short is, he ended up getting a copy of one of the advanced transcriptions, not a translation, but a transcription. Well, I guess you could say translation, but a transcription is just from Hebrew, let's say, into English letters. And he published it. And he got sued, but he really broke the dam. But once that got out there, all the rest of the scholars began to publish their material and everything else. And I remember being so fascinated by it. But let's start there for a minute. Why do you think, Josh? I mean, you obviously written a lot about this, but why are people so interested in these scrolls that from the desert? I mean, well, what's the fascination?
Well, I think because of the legitimacy around them, because among the Dead Sea Scrolls are all of the books of the Old Testament except Esther. And Esther might have been in there, and it could just be fragmented too much and we don't know. And there's a lot of theories on why Esther's hasn't been discovered, but it's suffice to say, it's pretty much every book of the Old Testament is in there. So that already adds a lot of weight to the Dead Sea Scrolls. That adds a lot of legitimacy. But not only that, there's some pretty intense claims in there prophetically that ended up coming true. So the timeline that they put on the Dead Sea Scrolls is usually about 200 years before Christ. There's probably some that are much older than that. We don't know which of these are copies from even older manuscripts or which ones are brand new. There's some from a little later as well, but it's right around 200 years before Christ. Well, there are prophetic Dead Sea Scrolls talking about the Messiah and specific things that he would do, things that we've always thought no Jewish person ever knew during the time of Christ, that the Messiah was going to do this and this and this and this. Everyone was taken by surprise. I grew up in church hearing that a lot and believed it, because when you read the Gospels, that's really what it sounds like. But that's not exactly the full story. So I think because it adds so much context like that to our Bibles. So for an example, with what I was saying, there was a large faction of Jewish believers in Israel at the time of Jesus that Josephus later called Essenes. So this is one of three main groups. There were a lot of groups. There were many of them, but the three main ones that pertain to our conversation here are Pharisees, Sadducees, and Essenes. Typically, we hear about the Pharisees and Sadducees quite a bit in the Gospels. We don't get that word Essene, but we do get the groups of people in there. And so there are times where Jesus will go to a certain place, and there will be hundreds or thousands of people listening to him, and they all get saved. He barely even has to say anything. They just get saved. Then there are other times where he'll be talking to a handful of people, and he'll do miracles. He'll like show everybody the proof, and they're just not buying it. They're just absolutely not doing it. It's like, well, what is the difference? The difference is because, by and large, not in every single case, but just by and large, generally, the ones that are stubborn and not believing, those are typically the Pharisees or Sadducees. They had a completely different view of what they thought the Messiah was going to do. And but the ones that did believe, they've been reading what we call the Dead Sea Scrolls now, but they've been reading these scrolls, they've been learning this stuff their entire lives. And in there are specific prophecies about what to expect when the Messiah comes, even to the year of when he would arrive. So they knew, they've studied this their whole lives, they knew the Messiah is going to arrive in my lifetime. And then once Jesus came on the scenes and then started fulfilling some of this stuff, they just immediately caught it. And so I think all of these things kind of added together. Plus, there's just kind of an air of mystery around it, being the Dead Sea Scrolls. And I think all of that put together really piques people's interest. Another thing, and this isn't such a good thing, but another thing too is there are extremists that will take the Dead Sea Scrolls and say that they say just the absolute wildest things. I mean, I remember you're talking about the 90s. I remember I was actually a kid in the 90s, and I would go to the supermarket with my mom, and I would see these tabloids. The Dead Sea Scrolls predict Jesus is coming back this year, and like just all this insane stuff. And it doesn't say anything like that. So I think that initial boom in the 90s, just getting all of this other stuff kind of in pop culture like that, because tabloids were a really big deal back then. Not so much anymore, thank God, but we got the internet now. So but I think all of that kind of rolled together adds to why these documents, more than almost anything else, why they're so interesting to people, and why they kind of have that pull on people.
Yeah, there's definitely a mystique, because I mean, I know for me, we have the biblical text, which is all there, and we can study it at any time. And then, but to be intrigued by, let's say, within you have what are known as apocryphal texts, like the Book of Maccabees and other things. But then you also have the pseudepigrapha, which are, you have Jewish pseudepigrapha and then even Christian. But to think in terms of like, the Testament of Adam and Eve, or the Testament of Abraham, you think, there's another story about Adam and Eve that I've never heard. I mean, besides, the first few chapters of Genesis. So it's very intriguing. But so there's no doubt that, as we said, there's 900 scrolls, and not all of them are biblical. Some are, again, even our commentaries. But some of the other things, you do have these other books that were well known at the time. Again, like the Book of Enoch, where the average Jewish person living in the land, they were not illiterate.
Right.
They definitely, these books were well known. It's like, the Lord of the Rings or whatever, in the sense of you had books that are out there. And obviously, no doubt, this group down there at the Dead Sea, they made whatever their goal was. It wasn't just them. I think there were others that came and brought scrolls from a variety of places, brought them to this area to hide them away from the Romans, because we know that, again, the war of basically 66 AD to 70. They sought to hide these very important documents. Some of them biblical, others just other rules. But there is this fascination because, and we're going to get into some of the details there, but even by themselves, they provide great context for the Bible.
Yes.
They provide an understanding of the Essenes that were written by Josephus or others. I think additionally, which one of the main verses, and I know you know this, but is Isaiah 40 verse 3, prepare the way of the Lord from the wilderness, from the desert. And so we know John the Baptist, the New Testament clearly says that he fulfilled that from the book of Malachi and Isaiah as well. And so the question then comes, and this is just maybe, I'm curious your opinion on it. There are those scholars on both sides that I see. Was John the Baptist, his theme verse was Isaiah 40 and Malachi 3. Well, that seems to be the exact same theme verses of the Essenes. Yes. That's why they were in the desert. Yeah. So, was John the Baptist an Essene?
I believe so. I believe it's very highly likely. I'm not going to say for absolute sure because we weren't there, and new evidence could come out that could disprove that. But no, I think it's extremely likely that he was, because, like you mentioned, one of their biggest reasons for going into Qumran. I mean, there was a lot of political stuff going on at the time that they wanted to remove themselves from. And
we know there were scenes in every community, but there was this group down in the desert. I mean, no doubt.
Yeah, and those were the Zadokian priests, the priests that were from the line of Zadok, the way that God commanded it to be. And Israel started going away from that and started having priests that were not from that line. And there was a lot of other things too. They were having problems with the calendar because they had an invading force that wanted Israel to use their pagan lunar calendar. And some of Israel was like, okay, yeah, we'll do that so we can do our other Jewish things. And then other Jewish people were like, nope, absolutely, we're not doing that. We're leaving. And those were the Zadokian priests and the people that worked with the priests. And then those who followed their interpretation, which they maintained was the original Jewish interpretation of the Old Testament, those that followed that were just known as Essenes. So yeah, you do have that split, and And another interesting difference too was, so the Pharisees got to the point where they just believed that prophecy had ceased because they weren't getting any prophecy from God anymore. Now, clearly, they adopted a pagan calendar. They weren't doing their temple rituals on the right days anymore, which there's very harsh consequences for that are laid out in the Old Testament. But the priests, the Qumran community is probably a better word for it, but the Qumran community fully believed in prophecy. They still had prophets. So going back to the question, was John the Baptist in Essene? One of the main prophecies that the Qumran community believed that they were fulfilling was that in Isaiah, that they were going to be the ones to prepare the way for the Lord. They even called themselves the Way, which we get that from Acts. And when Paul is talking about there's this sect called the Way, that's Qumran. That's them. They called themselves the Way. What's really interesting too is they didn't call their area Qumran. They actually called it Damascus. There's a whole etymology, behind that. But that this goes a little bit outside of the question. But that caused me to wonder in the book, and I write a lot about it in the book. When Paul was in Damascus, which Damascus was it? Was it Syria or was it Qumran? Because we read that Paul had to get like special permission from the high priest to be able to go to Damascus and basically take care of business. Well, if it was Syria, would he need that? It makes more sense if it was actually Qumran and specifically, and I don't remember the exact verse, but I think it says somewhere in there that when he was lowered out of the window, that doesn't it say that he was on a street that was called the Way or something like that?
The street called Straight.
Straight, yeah, and make straight the way of the Lord. So it makes sense if that prophecy was so ingrained into who they were as a people. Of course, they're going to name their street stuff like that, So there's that. Also, we know that. Originally, John the Baptist's father would have been a Pharisee. He was in the course of Abiah, so he would have worked in the temple. John the Baptist clearly was not a Pharisee. Well, what happened? We are kind of told the story where his father sees this angel and he can't talk for a while. I think what happened, the Qumran community, the Zadokian priests, they were known for almost like apprenticeships. They were known for taking in children that parents wanted them to go study with the priest. They would take in children into their community and bring them up in the way of the Zadokian priesthood, or just the Qumran way, the Essene way. Well, it makes sense then after that experience with, we're not told this specifically, but it lines up that after John's father went through all that maybe he said, okay, well, I don't want my son John to be raised in the Pharisee and the temple way because that's clearly wrong. So let's send him out to the priests of Zadok and have him learn there. So so there's that. When we're introduced to John, he's doing baptisms. The way he was doing baptisms was very Essene. It's laid out in a lot of the Dead Sea Scrolls how important ritual cleansings like that were, and they were a little different than the way that the Pharisees did it. The Pharisees they didn't necessarily like dunk the way that John the Baptist was doing. They had if I remember right, they had a really large, basically pool that they would walk into and fully submerge. And
walk on the right and come back up on the left.
Yeah, so it was a different process than how John the Baptist was doing it. So John the Baptist was not baptizing in the Pharisee way, but when you look at how the Essenes would do it, that lines up. So he didn't invent baptisms or anything, but what he was doing was he was baptizing people into this new faith because the Messiah was coming. And so John the Baptist was a literal fulfillment of that prophecy. He was making straight the way and all that. Another weird one. So all of that's pretty normal, but there's one weird one that I've always wondered since I was a kid. Why did the writer feel it necessary to include that John was eating locusts?
Locusts and honey. Yes, yes.
Why is that? That makes him sound like a crazy person to us because we're American and we don't do that. Yeah. Well, actually, there's some really interesting history behind that. It wasn't a typical delicacy to eat locusts in all of Israel, but in Qumran it was. And in the Dead Sea Scrolls, there's actual provisions for how to prepare them. And so that's another thing that lines up as well. That was a delicacy unique to the Qumran community. There's not necessarily one smoking gun, but when you add all of these things together, and there's a few other things too, but when you add all of them together, it really seems like John the Baptist was in Essene. I mean, even just in his theology, what he was teaching, it's very Essene-esque. Like it lines up more with that than anything else. So I think it's extremely likely that John the Baptist was in Essene.
Okay, that's good. And so we have, you have, I don't know, 12 chapters, 14 chapters, lots of appendices, which we certainly can't get into all of them. But the let's get into some of the other interesting things. Just the title. The first title you had of the draft, we'll say it that way.
Yeah.
The lost prophecies, and then here, which makes good sense, you change the word to forgotten prophecies, which helps distinguish the books. Makes sense.
Yeah.
So what do we mean? What do you mean in the sense of whether it's lost prophecies or forgotten prophecies? Kind of give us an overview of what that means.
Yeah, it's basically the same concept, and it was. I renamed it. I wanted to keep it something similar so people knew that the titles, these books are related, but I didn't want to release it under the same title because that would have just been confusing. So the basic idea behind both titles is the same, but it's that there are these prophecies that are thousands of years old. At least 2,000 and a couple hundred years old. That by and large aren't really talked about a whole lot in like academia. I've watched a lot of presentations on the Dead Sea Scrolls that are academic. They almost never get into the real prophecy stuff and what it means, because it means some crazy things. It means that Jesus is Lord. He's the Messiah. It clearly says that. And so in a sense, the church has kind of forgotten where we come from, because one of the most interesting things, one of the most inspiring things to me is what happened to the Essenes, what happened to the Qumran community. And it's funny because there are academic articles that ask this question. They don't even give you an answer. And the answer is pretty simple. It's what happened was Jesus came on the scene. A whole bunch of Essenes got saved. The Qumran community got saved. And Jesus put out the Great Commission, told people to go out and spread this to the world. So that's exactly what they did. They hid the scrolls in the cave. There's actually an interesting reason for that. There's practical reasons, of course, because of Rome and all that. And they wanted to, but there was, I forget the name of it, but there was a specific, I have it in the book, there was a specific kind of like ritualistic practice almost, that they don't destroy scrolls because it's the word of God. It's a gift from God to them. So they don't destroy scrolls when they
often would bury them.
Yeah, they bury them. And so it really seems like, at least partly, that's what was going on. They were kept preserved, and thank God they did that, because now we have them. But so that's one of the most interesting things, is that they went out, took the Great Commission seriously, preached the gospel, and that's how we heard the gospel. So we're the beneficiaries of the Essenes. That doesn't make us Essenes. We're Christians. Essenes converted to Christianity because the Essenes weren't perfect either. They had to be corrected on some things, not nearly as much as the Pharisees and Sadducees. But for example, one thing, they took oaths really seriously, which we should. There's nothing wrong with that. But in some of their writing, I mean, they would get to the point where even in their rules and stuff, like if somebody breaks an oath, or if somebody does this certain thing, you basically ostracize them. And there's almost to the point of like hating them. And it's funny because it reminds me of when Jesus, and when they went to the Samaritans, and they were like, should we just rain fire and just kill all these guys? Right. But that's how they were, and they were likely Essenes too. That's how they were taught as Essenes. They were taught just kind of in that way. And Jesus was like, no. You need some correction too. So and that's one of the things I wanted to get across in the book. It's not that, we're not Essenes. We shouldn't look at the Dead Sea Scrolls and think that we're going to convert to Essenes. Essene is like pre-Christianity almost. They needed some correction as well, and not as major theological stuff as like the Pharisees or Sadducees would have needed, but on some things they weren't quite there. Jesus got them there. So but it's interesting, just the context of how we got the gospel, how the gospel was originally presented, what that people group were looking forward to even before Christ was born. All of that, I mean, it just adds so much context and richness to our history and to Jewish history.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it is pretty amazing the extra context that we get, and to see again, this is they were well known by Josephus. I mean, Josephus has been around. He talked about this other group, and he's very clear as well, talking about their theology. There's several passages that speak. They were very strongly the sovereignty of God. They believe strongly in predestination. Some of these other interesting things, in contrast to the Pharisees and the Sadducees. You have a chapter in the book on the Dead Sea Scrolls and the New Testament. Let's talk about that. I mean, what connections are there between the New Testament and what was discovered in the Dead Sea Scrolls?
Yeah, well, amazingly, a lot of it is that some of the apostles were likely Essenes as well. You just need to look at, their theology, their teachings, and even the stuff, like I mentioned before, the stuff that they needed to be corrected on. So it's amazing that even though we don't get the word Essene in the New Testament, we still get them as people. So in that chapter was where I talked about how Paul likely converted to Essene theology. I mean, of course, Christian, but at that time they were kind of one and the same. They were like the Essenes were becoming Christian. But so all the Damascus stuff that we talked about before, but also Paul said that he was gone for like 3 years. Well, the Essenes it was either Community Rule or Damascus Document. I think it's Community Rule, but I have it in book. But in there, they describe what their process is for a new initiate. If somebody wants to become part of the Qumran community, what do they have to do? And there are certain oaths, but it's a 3-year-long process. And so with the Damascus stuff, and I mean, you think about it, Paul started as a Pharisee. He certainly didn't end that way. So if you're Paul and you're a Pharisee and you're so much a Pharisee that you're slaughtering other people because you think you're doing what God wants you to do, and then you're on a path to maybe Qumran, you're on this path to Damascus, and then you see Jesus and he confronts you and you realize, oh my gosh, I've been wrong. The Essenes were right. Well, what are you going to do? You're probably going to go want to try to join up with them. And so I don't think that 3-year thing is an accident. I don't think anything that's mentioned in the Bible is an accident, like even the locusts, like all this stuff. So the 3-year thing, I think that's meant to point back to that was the time for a new initiate of the Qumran community. So it doesn't spell it out and exactly, so I can't say for sure that's what it is, but I think it's likely. So we see remnants of that in the New Testament. Also, when Paul talks about there's some call a sect and the way, he's not just talking about a random group of people. That's the Qumran community. That's what they called themselves. They called themselves the way. So just seeing them in the New Testament like that, and then of course there's a bunch of Dead Sea Scroll lines and pieces that are quoted in the New Testament. One, for example, when John the Baptist was in prison and he sent somebody to go ask Jesus, like, are you the one or should we wait for another? And a lot of Christians nowadays, when they read that, it's like, did John have a moment of doubt? Not exactly. I mean, I think he just wanted to be sure he had the right interpretation. He was already sold on Jesus. He knew Jesus was the Messiah. So he just wanted to be sure, like, all right, like when he asked it specifically that way, he wasn't asking, are you the Messiah or is it some other guy? When he said, should we wait for another, the Pharisees had this idea that there would be like 2 messiahs. There would be one that would come and do something, win some war, then there would be another one that would come later and do something else. And, they had a much different interpretation than the Essenes did.
I mean, they had the Messiah ben David, the conquering Messiah, and then Messiah ben Joseph, the Messiah son of Joseph, the suffering one. Yeah. So it is interesting there. And in Matthew 11, as you mentioned, John the Baptist comes or sends somebody to ask. But yeah, I mean, I know what you're talking about. So let's. This is good. I remember writing a paper on this. So I mean,
you did?
Yeah.
Every time we do these, I find out you've written papers and articles on all this stuff that I've studied. You're going to start thinking I'm stealing this stuff from you.
This is good. But to talk about this, because I think this particular question in Matthew 11 is very, very important.
Very. Yeah. So he wasn't asking, like, are you the Messiah or is it somebody else? Basically, what he was asking is, like, are the Essenes right or are the Pharisees right? I just want to be sure. Like, is there going to be another, or are you it? Or do the Essenes got it right? Because the Essenes just believed that there was going to be one Messiah, 2 comings, which is interesting because they it's written in, I think it's 11Q Melchizedek or one of these. I have it in the book again, but it's specifically written what the Messiah was going to come and do, and that he was going to die for transgressions or something. They didn't have all of it, but they had a lot more than the Pharisees did. So what's interesting is what answer does Jesus give back to go send to John? He says, well, basically, here's the list of things that the Messiah is prophesied to do. Tell him I've done these.
Tell them what you've seen.
And
he
all
lists
of them
yeah.
make sense. I think there's 6 of them. All of them except one is from the Old Testament. There's one, though, that's not from the Old Testament, and it's raising the dead. So nowhere in the Old Testament is it prophesied that the Messiah is going to raise the dead when he comes back. But Jesus was using that as proof. Well, why? Well, because that was from a Dead Sea Scroll called, I believe it was the Messianic Apocalypse.
Yeah, MM6 or something like that.
Yeah, and in that, there's a specific prophecy that the Messiah will raise the dead. So in saying that, he's telling John, like, don't worry, like, you got it right. That's correct. The Essene interpretation is you have it right. You don't got to wait for another on the one. And so that's amazing. We get that, we get the story, we get the account in the Gospels, but we don't get that actual fragment that says that prophecy.
And in fact, it's in exact order.
Yes,
it's when the way that Matthew writes, the way Jesus says it, it's in exact order as the Dead Sea Scroll text. You're like, that's incredible to see the connection there.
Yeah, so it shows us that, like, even Jesus endorsed the Dead Sea Scrolls. And I want to be careful on how I say that, because I'm not saying that necessarily we should look at them as inspired texts today. They may have been for the time. Maybe they are now.
Or every last scroll. But at least that understanding there,
yes.
that Messianic understanding.
Yeah. When the Bible specifically quotes something, at least that quote, at least that thing, you can take to the bank that that's inspired. Because there's this big question that people wonder about, like, and people are hesitant to read the Dead Sea Scrolls because it's like, I just want to deal with the Bible. The Bible is inspired. I know that. This other stuff I'm not sure about. And I say, well, the safest way to look at it is history. This is what the Essenes believed. This is how their beliefs led them, and their interpretations of the Old Testament, because there's a ton of commentary. This is how that led them to figure out, to know that Jesus was the Messiah with very little convincing. They just already knew that. And so it's interesting to get the context. And like I've said before, Ken Johnson wrote the foreword of the books, and he's said this many times before too. I actually got this from him, but that there's nothing in the Dead Sea Scroll that changes the Bible. There's nothing that changes anything, but it does add a lot of context, and there's a lot of understanding. Somebody might say, yeah, well, the Qumran and Syria thing is changing it. It's not changing it. If it's right, then we were wrong to begin with, and we should want to be right. If the Dead Sea Scrolls were wrong on that point, or if I'm just interpreting it wrong or whatever, it doesn't really change anything. I mean, the account's still the same. Paul's faith is still the same. Everything still lines up. So there's nothing theologically, or there's nothing like foundational to the faith that actually gets changed at all. It just adds a lot of context and just some really cool revelations.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, I think the phraseology in Luke 16 about the sons of light. Yeah. I mean, that's an unusual phrase in the New Testament, and yet it appears
very usual in the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Very exactly. You're like, and Jesus himself uses that. It talks about the sons of light being, being less shrewd, not as shrewd as the sons of darkness. But there's so much we could discuss here. Again, you have another chapter on baptism and Messiah and prophecy, Damascus, but we can't get away, I think, in this conversation, because you talk so much as well about the Qumran calendar and the Essene calendar, and that always brings up a lot of discussion. Give us a kind of a short synopsis of, the differences between today, and just give us the background. Today, I should have looked at it. If you go to Israel today, for them, they're not necessarily talking about the year 2024.
Right.
They have a Hebrew calendar day.
Yeah.
So you have the Hebrew calendar, you have the Essene calendar, and if there's any other Jewish calendars, talk about that and how the Essene calendar is different than what we have today. Yeah,
so the main thing that happened, and we've had to piece this together just through other intertestamental histories and Dead Sea Scroll stuff, and it's interesting because there's a prophecy in the book of Jubilees about this, but basically what happened, from what we can piece together, this probably was when Antiochus IV Epiphanes, was doing his whole thing. It likely was that time. Maybe the guy after him, Antipater or whatever.
Yeah, roughly, but just for people, 165 BC or so.
Yeah, so Israel gets invaded, and from what we can kind of piece together, the general story is Antiochus or whoever was like, okay, we'll let you do some of your Jewish things. We're taking over
because these are Greeks. These are Greeks.
Yeah. We'll let you still do some of your Jewish things, but you have to adopt our calendar. And they had a lunar calendar. They had a pagan lunar calendar because, again, the Seleucids and stuff. So some of the ruling class in Israel said, okay, that's a good deal. We don't get slaughtered and we just have to do this pagan calendar. And so some of them went along with that, which was wrong because another group said that's completely ridiculous. We're not doing that. Because their calendar, they originally had a solar calendar, and their calendar was so important for when to do certain feasts and festivals and rituals and things with the temple. And we read that all over in the Old Testament. It was really important to God that these things are done on certain days. Well, if you have a different calendar, you're not going to be able to do that. So that was part of the split, and that's part of what. In a way,
you're talking a split within the Jewish world.
Within the Jewish world, what kind of created the Essenes, the Pharisees, and Sadducees? Like, there was more to it than that, but I mean, we could talk for 2 hours if we get into all the history. So the ones that wanted to keep the solar calendar, I think at first they went to like Egypt for a little while, but eventually they ended up in Qumran, and they settled there. So they kept their solar calendar, and what's interesting is. People have been able, Ken Johnson's one of them, has been able to piece together through the Dead Sea Scrolls, piece together this calendar and exactly how it works. And you can take that calendar, you can apply that to any book of the Bible that has anything to do with day counts or calendar or anything, and it fits. From Genesis to Revelation, this calendar is like perfect. It just fits every book. And that to me was mind-blowing. You can't do that with the Pharisee calendar, which is
basically lunar.
That's what the Jewish people are using today. Basically, it doesn't work. The lunar calendar doesn't work. But when you plug that in, and I do it in the book, there's 3 main areas where I did that: the flood of Noah, the time that Moses spent with God on the mountain, and then a bunch of prophetic stuff. Because you can apply that same calendar to 1260 days, 1290 days. What are all these day counts? And they fall on certain festivals. The other interesting thing about the Essene calendar are there's extra festivals, and it actually makes sense that there would be. So in the modern Jewish calendar, there's seven festivals. Festivals, feast days, whatever. Well, in the Essene one, there's 12. Well, we have a prophecy that says, such and such is going to happen for time, times, and half a time. Mm-hmm. Well, that word time is moedim, and it's talking about festival cycles. Year is an okay translation, but it's not exact. So it is technically 3.5 years, but how they count those years is based on the moedim cycles that have to do with the festivals. You can't have half with 7. How do you have time and times make sense, but how do you have half a time if you have 7 festivals? It would have to be a whole number because you can't just split a festival in half and think that festival is done. Makes perfect sense on the Essene calendar. They have 12, so it's 6 and 6 would be half. So that's another interesting thing. The way they broke down their calendar is really interesting too, and ties into a lot of prophecy. And this seems to be this is usually what most people are interested in hearing. So
give them the interesting stuff.
Yeah. So the way that we have like decades and centuries and millennia and stuff like that, they had something similar, but it was based mostly around 7s and 5s. So they had Jubilee, which was 7 years. They had a Shemitah, which was 7 years. They had a Jubilee, which was 50 years. They had an Ona, which was 500 years. And they had an Age, which was 2,000 years. And then they had prophecies of what things would happen in each of those time spans. Well, they had that for their own time. They also had it for our time, too. So according to the Essene calendar, there would be basically 4 ages. It's technically like 3.5, but it's all based on the week. So there's 7 days in a week. An age is 2,000 years. So you have 3 of those, so that's 6,000 years. And then you have a 1,000-year Sabbath, which to us is the millennial reign of Christ. They've always believed that. They always believed at the end of the 6,000th year would be this 1,000 year where the Messiah would reign and rule on earth. So that wasn't new to Revelation. That's been believed for hundreds of years before that. So they thought of the first age, the age of creation, which would have been from the time of creation to the call of Abraham. And then from the call of Abraham to 75 AD would have been the age of Torah. And then from 75 AD to, and this is where I'm going to have to give a real big caveat after I give this year, but from 75 AD till 2075 AD is the church age. Now, before anybody freaks out and says, well, we got to wait till 2075 for the rapture, we got to wait. I'm not saying that. Think about the Torah age. The Torah age, according to the Essene calendar, ended in 75 AD. When did Jesus come and do all of his stuff? He didn't wait till 75 AD. He came pretty early in that final 50 years, that final Jubilee. And that's actually where the subtitle of my book comes from, Unlocking what is it? I got to look at it now. Unlocking the final Jubilee of the church age, because we're about to enter into our final Jubilee, our final 50 years, which will be roughly from 2025 to 2075. Technically, just because the calendars are different, technically, I think it's like early to mid-March of 2026 to around that same time, 2076. But calendars are a little different. But basically we're about to enter into that time. And when we look at all of the prophecies that Jesus fulfilled at the end of the Torah age, he chose to do that really early in their final Jubilee. So like Jesus was crucified likely 32 AD. Give or take a year, but likely it was 32 AD. That's also when Pentecost happened. That's when we would say the church age started. To the Essenes, it's like they would have saw that they tended to see these final jubilees or these final time periods as a transition period between ages. So you kind of got both going on. You have the winding down of the Torah age and all the prophecies that needed to be fulfilled according to that. But then you had the ramping up of the church age. So an example that I use in the book, it's like this. If I said that I'm going to have a birthday party, this Friday, well, it doesn't mean that, this Friday at 3:00. It doesn't mean that Friday at 3:00, I'm going to start doing stuff to prepare for the party. That's the time when everything should be prepared so we can finally start the birthday party at 3:00 on Friday. So, Monday I might order the cake, and Tuesday I might get the presents, and Wednesday I might order the attractions and figure all that out. Then I might pick up the cake on Thursday or whatever. There's all this preparatory stuff for the party, but the party doesn't start till 3 p.m. on Friday. Well, it's the same kind of thing. A lot of prophecy needed to be fulfilled for the church age to officially begin. So the Messiah needed to die for our transgressions. He needed to raise from the dead. Pentecost needed to happen. The temple needed to be destroyed. There was just a lot of prophecy, and it needed time for that. So that by the end date for their age, which according to their calendar was 75, 76 AD, by that time we can officially say everything is in place to start the church age, and that's what happened. So I think the same kind of thing the next time around. We have a lot that needs to happen still. Not only the 7-year tribulation, that's obviously a big one, and all the prophecies with that, and we don't know where to place that exactly. But we know from, one that I like to think about is we know from the end of Ezekiel, those last, 7, 8, 9 chapters or so, there's going to be an immense temple, a city, and all of that needs to be built. And I really don't think, because he just has never done this before, I don't think that Jesus is going to come down, snap his fingers, and it's just all there. It's just all built. It's all perfect. I think people are going to build that. And what's interesting is, so there might be another transition period at the end of the church age. You could have, and I'm not setting a date, but you could have an early rapture. Let's say rapture could happen today. And then let's say, I don't know, in a year, a couple of months, the tribulation starts, whatever. Well, after Jesus returns, you could have decades to get the world ready to start the millennium age, to start because everything has to be in place before that first day can begin. So that temple's going to have to be built. That city's going to have to be built. What's interesting too is Herod's temple took about 40 years to build. So these things take a while. It takes decades. Also, when you think about it, there's not going to be, I don't think me and you as glorified humans are going to be building it. I think the actual humans that and there's not going to be many,
no,
but
and
the very
non-glorified
few
bodies,
yeah, the very few that survive and make it through the tribulation. I believe that those are going to be the ones, because when you read in Ezekiel, when it talks about the priests, it gives like specific instructions, like, well, if the priest is married, this or they have to do this or that. Well, okay, that's not us. We're not going to be priests. We're not going to be married. If a priest sweats on his garment, then we need to do that. I don't think we're going to sweat in our glorified body. I mean, I can't say for sure, I guess, but
probably unlikely.
Yeah, I just think it's unlikely, and so I think that these are humans that this is talking about. So it makes sense that it would be humans that would be building the temple and the city, and maybe they get help with angels and maybe by us. I don't know. I don't think so, but that would take time. So all of that to say, because I get this comment so much, the very first time I mention 2075, I always see it in the YouTube comments. People freak out. I'm not going to make it that long. The way that the world is going, I cannot see it lasting till 2075. I'm not saying that. It could be, but I don't think so. I think that we're probably going to be out of here a lot sooner than that. Who knows for sure? But there are ways where this could all work out and still have it be 2075 and have it all make perfect sense. I mean, how long does it take to get the rest of the world to understand the new rules? Like, if you don't go to tabernacles, you're going to get plagued. Like, so how long does it take to get all of this set up? And it's not going to be overnight. I mean, how could it be? So there are ways that all of this can work out. I don't want people to freak out about 2075. I'm sure they still will in the comment section. I can't seem to escape it. But I'm just saying, following the pattern of how the end of the Torah age, how that concluded, I hope that Jesus returns early in our final Jubilee. We'll see, but that's my hope.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I even, in just in the sense of understanding that 32, 33 AD, like you said, Jesus was there, he ascended, that, 2,000 years is coming up.
That's an age.
It's an age. Mm-hmm. And I find that very fascinating that the Lord would allow the church to have 2,000 years of a witness on earth.
Yeah.
And that's coming up here in, 8 years, 9 years, which isn't long as it relates to that. And so, yeah, we know the rapture can happen anytime, but in the sense of wrapping up the church, if the church is, going to be a witness for 2,000 years, again, we don't have this as a fact, but,
right.
And, especially as well in some of the details of our Gregorian calendar, mm-hmm. If you study that out, there's no guarantee that there isn't things lost.
Yeah, it's impossible to be exact. Yep. And that might be by design, because clearly yep. God does not want us to know exactly when the rapture, yep. and that's for our benefit anyway.
It is.
If we knew that would be all we'd be thinking about. Like, if I knew the rapture is not going to happen for 10 years, am I going to be really motivated to, like, how motivated am I going to, I would still be motivated to go and witness and make, get people saved, but whereas it could happen today, that's way more motivating, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
God in all of his wisdom, I think he's keeping that one close to the vest, and for very good reason.
Yep, he knows human nature. And anyways, Forgotten Prophecies of the Dead Sea Scrolls, 2 volumes. Josh, it's been awesome talking about this. And again, you can go to Prophecy Watchers, and we didn't get into even.
Oh, there's so much. We would be here for 2 days if we tried to get through everything.
Didn't get everything, but again, to me, it's extremely fascinating, and the way you develop this as well. So,
thank you.
Appreciate you, everybody, listening today. Again, if you just as a reminder, subscribe to the channel. Also, join us in Branson come December. It's going to be a good time. December 5th through 8th. ProphecyWatchers.com. Check it out, and appreciate you listening. And we'll catch you all next time.